No one at that wedding imagined that, before the final song played, the most talked-about name in the room wouldn't be the bride's, nor the billionaire who paid for every extravagant detail. It would be the name of someone no one had bothered to remember for a long time. A woman who knew that place not by crystal glasses and champagne, but by buckets, damp cloths, and the sharp scent of cleaning products. And there was something even more disturbing about it all. She wasn't there by mistake. Not by luck. Not by coincidence. She was there because someone wanted her there. And not to celebrate, but to be diminished. The invitation arrived on an uneventful Thursday, the kind of day that blends into every other one. No special date. No good news. Just another attempt to make overdue bills stretch a little longer. The envelope didn't belong there. Thick paper. Elegant typography. Her name written with deliberate care, as if every letter had been designed to impress, or intimidate. Inside a small apartment on the outskirts of the city, that object felt completely out of place. Sarah Mitchell held the envelope for a few seconds before opening it. Long enough to feel a strange tightening in her chest. It wasn't excitement. It was instinct. Some things warn you before they hurt you. And that invitation did exactly that. Earlier that same Thursday, the day had begun like any other inside the corporate building in the financial district. Glass everywhere. Cold steel. An expensive kind of silence, reserved for those who give orders, not for those who clean. Sarah moved through spotless hallways, pushing her cleaning cart, invisible as always. Executives passed by discussing numbers that would never change her life. No one asked her name. No one noticed her face. She knew that building better than most of the people who worked there. And now, ironically, she was being summoned back to the same place. Not as an employee, but as a guest. Or at least, that's what they wanted her to believe. Throughout all those years working at the company, Sarah moved carefully, weaving around people who crossed the hallways as if she were part of the decor. Just over 40 years old, she had mastered an essential skill for surviving in that world. Going unnoticed. She walked with restrained posture, precise movements, eyes lowered. Her hands, marked by years of harsh chemicals and repetitive labor, told a story no one there cared to hear. Still, she knew something few people ever realized. Invisible people hear everything. And that was how Sarah came to understand that the building wasn't made only of business, but of vanity, cruelty disguised as humor, and a quiet pleasure in diminishing those who couldn't defend themselves. She didn't know it yet, but that invitation wasn't a social gesture. It was a test. And that night would change far more than anyone present was prepared to face. At the end of the workday, when the building began to lose the performative shine of business hours, the atmosphere shifted. The silence became more honest, less rehearsed. This was the moment when Sarah felt less watched, even though she knew, deep down, that she never truly was. She was pushing the cleaning cart down the side hallway, the one almost no one used, when she heard the sound of heels before she saw the face. Too precise a sound to ignore. Rebecca Lawson. This time, she didn't just walk past. She stopped. The gesture was small, but calculated. Like someone who knows that a pause can speak louder than words. Rebecca was holding a light-colored box, elegant, minimalist, the kind that didn't belong in service corridors or near someone in a uniform. The smile came first. Controlled. Polite. A smile trained to look kind, but sharp underneath. "I almost forgot," she said, extending the envelope with practiced ease. "I thought you'd like this." Sarah felt her stomach tighten before she even reached for it. Not out of fear. Out of instinct. The body recognizes traps long before the mind finds words for them. She held the envelope with excessive care, as if the paper itself could cut. There was nothing improvised about it. The invitation was expensive. Thick. Cold to the touch. An object designed to communicate status before it was ever read. Behind Rebecca, two women exchanged quick glances. A man pretended to check his phone. Suppressed laughter slipped out without much effort to hide it. There was an audience, and that said everything. Sarah nodded in thanks. She didn't smile. She didn't ask questions. She didn't react the way they expected. Rebecca tilted her head slightly, like someone studying a piece that wasn't behaving according to the script. "It's going to be something special," she added, before continuing down the hallway as if nothing had happened. Sarah stood still for a few seconds. Not out of hesitation. Out of processing. The feeling was old. Familiar. That mix of discomfort and clarity that always appeared when someone tried to place her in a role she hadn't chosen. She opened the invitation right there, away from direct stares, beside the cleaning cart. A wedding. Black tie attire. An address outside the city, surrounded by private gardens, discreet security, and a kind of luxury that never appears in advertisements, only within closed circles. It was a space Sarah had been in before. Always behind the scenes. Always invisible. Never as a guest. Her chest tightened. Not with emotion. With recognition. The confirmation came slowly, like puzzle pieces falling into place. Even earlier that same day, the mood in the building had shifted. Conversations stopping when she approached. Whispers no longer bothering to hide. Eyes lingering just a second longer than usual. Sarah didn't need to hear everything to understand. The story was already circulating, and she was part of it. Hours before receiving the invitation, Rebecca had passed by while Sarah was cleaning the main floor of the executive level. The marble reflected too much light, the kind of shine that insists on reminding you who belongs in that space and who merely maintains it. "Careful with the water," Rebecca had said without slowing her pace. "That floor costs more than what most people make in a year." The comment was delivered lightly, almost casually, as if it were just a technical observation. Sarah didn't respond. She wrung out the cloth harder than necessary, felt the familiar sting in her fingers, and kept working. She had learned early on that reacting in that environment wasn't courage. It was ammunition for people who needed to feel superior. Now, hours later, sitting on the edge of her narrow bed, Sarah reread the invitation under the weak light of the bedside lamp. The paper looked out of place. Too expensive. Too imposing. An object that didn't belong on that table, in that life. The apartment was quiet. Small. Honest. Every piece of furniture told a story of necessity, not aesthetic choice. The contrast with the invitation was almost offensive. Sarah placed the envelope on the table and stepped back a few feet, watching it as if it were alive. Something that took up more space than it should. She didn't feel anger right away. She felt something deeper. Clarity. That wasn't an invitation. It was a carefully planned provocation. Rebecca didn't want her there out of politeness. She wanted her there out of discomfort. They expected Sarah to show up out of place. To get the tone wrong. To feel small. To confirm, in front of everyone, the narrative they had already decided to tell. It was a social trap. One of the oldest. What hurt most wasn't the cruelty itself. Sarah already knew that game. What hurt was the certainty that they were counting on her presence, that she had already been cast in the spectacle as a supporting character, not as someone who chooses, but as someone who is used. She lay down on the bed without turning off the light. The invitation remained there, visible. The fan spun slowly, pushing warm air without conviction. Sarah turned onto her side, then onto the other. Every time she closed her eyes, the same realization returned. This wasn't just about a wedding. It was about something bigger. About accepting, once again, the place they had decided for her. She still didn't know what she would do. Going meant stepping into hostile territory, where every look would be ready to measure, judge, and laugh in silence. Not going meant accepting the role they had written for her without asking permission. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of that choice settle in slowly. That night, she didn't make any final decision. But one thing was already clear. From that invitation on, nothing would be neutral anymore. And whether she liked it or not, that night would bring face to face two versions of the same woman. The one who learned to disappear to survive. And the one who might finally be too tired to remain invisible. If you've ever felt invisible at some point in your life, subscribe to the channel. This story still has a turn that's going to hit you hard. Sarah Mitchell didn't sleep that night, and it wasn't because of street noise or the stubborn heat the fan pushed around the small bedroom without much conviction. The invitation stayed on the table, open, taking up space it didn't belong to, reflecting the weak glow of the bedside lamp as if it were there to remind her, every single second, of something she still didn't have the courage to name completely. A wedding. Formal attire. A distant address, surrounded by private gardens, discreet security, and a kind of luxury that never appears in advertisements, only in places you enter by invitation, and almost never by accident. She turned onto one side of the bed, then the other, feeling the weight of that silent presence grow the more she tried to ignore it. Every time she closed her eyes, the same sensation returned, persistent, almost physical, as if something inside her were being pulled back into the light after years carefully buried. This wasn't just a social event. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a test, and someone was very interested in watching the outcome. The next morning, Sarah left the apartment earlier than usual. She needed to walk, to breathe, to feel the city before stepping through the glass doors of the building again. The streets woke up in their usual automatic rhythm. Cafes opening, crowded buses, people crossing without looking, each person locked inside their own urgency. Sarah walked as if watching an old movie, familiar yet distant, as if she were there and somewhere else at the same time. There was something strange in her body, a discomfort that wasn't fear, but wasn't courage either. It felt like something long asleep had been stirred after years of silence, something she believed she had left behind for good, but that now insisted on moving again, slow and unsettling, inside her. At work, the atmosphere was different. Not because of her, it never was, but because now people knew about the invitation. Conversations stopped when Sarah approached, eyes looked away too quickly or lingered a second longer than normal, as if everyone were evaluating something that hadn't happened yet. There was no open hostility, no visible support, just expectation, a kind of uncomfortable curiosity that didn't bother pretending to be humane. She crossed paths with Rebecca Lawson twice that day. The second time, while pushing the cleaning cart down the side corridor, she heard enough to confirm what had already begun forming inside her the night before. "I want everyone watching," Rebecca said to someone, her voice low but clear enough to carry. "These things need an audience." Sarah felt her stomach twist, but she didn't turn her head, didn't slow her steps, didn't do anything that would reveal a reaction. She kept walking, though her movements lost their automatic rhythm and became heavier, more deliberate. This wasn't paranoia. It was confirmation. The wedding wasn't about love, or celebration, or the beginning of a life together. It was about display. About control. And she was part of the show, not as a legitimate guest, but as a carefully placed prop meant to provoke restrained laughter and looks of superiority. At the end of the shift, while changing clothes in the cramped locker room, a coworker spoke without looking directly at her, as if eye contact might turn words into responsibility. "I heard you were invited to Rebecca's wedding." Sarah lifted her gaze slowly. "I was." The silence that followed was thick, uncomfortable, full of things left unsaid. The woman hesitated, took a breath, then added, almost apologetically, "She's not very good with this kind of thing." Sarah nodded. She didn't need a warning. She needed to decide. Back at the apartment, exhaustion didn't take her straight to bed. She sat in front of the old shelf against the wall, staring at the crooked photo frame she'd never bothered to straighten. Her mother was still there, wearing that steady look that seemed to cut through time, as if she knew exactly what Sarah was feeling in that moment. She pulled the shelf forward and revealed something she rarely touched. A dark wooden box, simple but well cared for, kept there not out of neglect, but by choice. Sarah stared at the lid for a few seconds before opening it, not out of nostalgia, but out of fear, because some memories don't hurt because they're sad, they hurt because they remind us of who we were before we gave up. Inside were photographs. Not of her current life, not of the quiet, shrunken version of herself that moved through hallways unseen, but of another Sarah, more upright, more whole, attending community meetings, local events, surrounded by people smiling with something that looked like genuine gratitude. In one photo, she stood beside her father in front of a simple sign that read, Mitchell Community Foundation. Sarah traced the image with her fingers, slowly, as if she needed to confirm that it had all been real. The memory came without warning, bringing sounds, smells, sensations with it. The small office, always full. Phones ringing. People coming and going with ideas, requests, projects. She remembered the feeling of being heard, of making decisions, of knowing her presence carried real weight in other people's lives. Then came the collapse, slow and merciless. Money diverted without her knowledge, vague accusations, endless legal battles, small headlines, not big enough to spark public defense, but more than enough to destroy a reputation. Then came the losses time never fixes. Her parents' deaths, back to back, too fast, too cruel. The house sold. The foundation shut down. Her name gradually erased, until all that remained was the silent choice to disappear in order to survive. Sarah closed the box suddenly and took a deep breath, as if the air had thinned. The invitation was still on the table, two versions of the same life separated by paper too thick to ignore. Her phone vibrated, cutting through the silence. An old number, saved for years, never deleted. She hesitated before answering, feeling the weight of the past approach with a single vibration. Hello. There was a brief pause on the other end, then a familiar voice, holding back surprise. Sarah? Is that really you? She closed her eyes, recognizing the voice instantly. It's me, Laura. Laura wasn't just an old friend. She was a witness, someone who knew who Sarah had been before everything fell apart, someone who now moved easily through the very spaces Sarah had trained herself not to even imagine. I heard about the wedding, Laura said carefully. And I heard about the invitation. Sarah didn't respond right away, letting the silence confirm what they both already knew. I'm not calling to judge you, Laura continued quickly. I just thought you should know. They're expecting you to show up, not out of kindness, but for entertainment. Something clicked inside Sarah with almost painful clarity. Thank you for telling me, she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. After the call, she sat back down on the bed, feeling the weight of that choice grow heavier, with no room left for pretending. Going meant stepping into hostile territory, where every look would be ready to measure, judge, and laugh in silence. Not going meant accepting, once again, the role they had chosen for her. She opened the narrow closet. Few clothes. None suitable. She smiled without humor, recognizing another layer of the trap. This was exactly what they expected, that she would realize too late that she didn't belong there. Sarah returned to the table, picked up the invitation, folded it carefully, didn't tear it, didn't throw it away, just placed it inside her bag, not as someone accepting humiliation, but as someone acknowledging a challenge she didn't ask for, and didn't intend to refuse. In that moment, something shifted. Not in the world, but in her. She still didn't know how she would face it. She had no plan, no clear allies, no guarantees. But one certainty began to form with unsettling calm: she would no longer be invisible by choice. And that silent decision, made alone in a modest apartment, far from the gardens where they planned to laugh at her, became the true point of no return. Because from that moment on, Sarah was no longer running. She was walking straight towards something they tried to bury. And failed. And you? If you were in her place right now, would you go all the way? Or would you step back to protect yourself? Tell me in the comments. I really want to know what this part stirred in you. The days leading up to the wedding moved painfully slowly, as if time itself had decided to test Sarah Mitchell's endurance. Every morning began with the same weight in her chest, the same question echoing in silence as she brewed her simple coffee and watched the city wake up through the narrow apartment window. What exactly do they expect me to do when I get there? It wasn't just about clothes. Or the venue. It was about crossing an invisible line Sarah had learned, for survival, never to step over. A line that separates those who belong from those who merely circulate. Those who are seen from those who are merely tolerated. At work, the change was subtle, but constant enough to be impossible to ignore. Conversations stopped when she approached. Some people whispered without bothering to hide it, others avoided eye contact, as if silence were a convenient way to avoid taking a side. News of the invitation had spread far too quickly, and now Sarah wasn't just invisible anymore. She was being watched. Evaluated. As if everyone were waiting for a reaction, a mistake, a public confirmation that she truly didn't belong in that world. Rebecca Lawson, on the other hand, seemed to be enjoying it even more. She moved through the hallways with an easy, overly polite smile, as if performing a better version of herself. She spoke loudly on the phone, dropped sharp remarks with calculated lightness, making it clear that the entire week revolved around her. At one point, she stopped beside Sarah's cleaning cart, leaned lightly against the marble, and said in an almost gentle tone, "I hope you're excited. It's going to be unforgettable." Sarah lifted her gaze just enough to catch Rebecca's reflection in the dark glass wall. She didn't respond. The silence stretched longer than comfortable. Rebecca held her smile for 1 second too long before walking away, but something in her posture betrayed irritation. Small, almost imperceptible. Sarah noticed it. That night at home, the closet was still the same. Few options, none suitable. She tried on an old, simple dress and looked at herself in the cracked mirror. It wasn't ugly. It wasn't wrong for the life she lived. But it wouldn't survive the environment she had been invited into. It wasn't armor. That version of herself wouldn't withstand the rehearsed laughter already forming somewhere beyond reach. She took the dress off slowly and sat on the bed, feeling the familiar sense of inadequacy trying to creep back in. That well-known inner voice that whispers that some spaces simply were never meant for you. That was when the phone rang. This time, Sarah answered without hesitation. "You're going to need help," Laura said on the other end, without preamble. "And I'm not just talking about clothes." They met 2 days later at a discreet atelier, tucked away on a quiet street far from flashy storefronts. The space smelled of fresh fabric and coffee, mannequins scattered throughout, natural light pouring in through tall windows, a respectful silence that stood in stark contrast to the constant noise outside. Sarah felt out of place the moment she walked in. Her body reacted before her mind could catch up. Laura noticed. "Listen," she said, placing a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "No one here is looking at you the way they look at you out there." Sarah took a deep breath. For the first time since receiving the invitation, she felt something close to relief. Between fabrics, fittings, and adjustments, they talked about more than appearances. They talked about the past. About choices. About losses that had never been given time to be processed. They talked about who Sarah had been before she disappeared, and how much she had shrunk herself to fit into a world that had never truly made space for her. At one point, Laura stopped in front of a piece still unfinished, holding the fabric carefully. "You know this isn't just a wedding, right?" Sarah nodded. "They don't want you to simply show up," Laura continued, her voice firm. "They want you exposed. They want you to make a mistake. They want you to confirm the story they invented about you." The words landed heavy. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. Part of her wanted to quit right there, to invent an excuse, fake an illness, plan a sudden trip, anything that would keep her safe. But safety came with too high a price, continuing to be erased. In the days that followed, memories began to surface without warning, not as nostalgia, but as a kind of reckoning. Old meetings, improvised speeches, people thanking her for opportunities she had helped create. Sarah wondered when she had started believing that all of it had been nothing more than a mistake from the past, something that didn't deserve to be reclaimed. Back at the building, a small incident triggered another warning. A supervisor pulled her aside, his voice lowered too much to be casual. "Look, Sarah, just a heads up. Rebecca mentioned your name this morning. She said she expects you to know how to behave." It wasn't a direct threat. It was worse. It was a warning. Sarah left work with her heart racing. She walked aimlessly for several blocks, watching storefronts she never entered, people who never saw her. Everything felt fragile now, as if any misstep could confirm the role they were waiting for her to play. That night, sitting on the apartment floor, surrounded by open boxes and scattered memories, Sarah felt the conflict finally grow real. Going meant facing not only Rebecca, but the very history she had tried to bury. Not going meant allowing others, once again, to define who she was. She picked up one of the old photographs. In it, she was smiling without fear, without asking permission to exist. "What would you do now?" she whispered to no one. The answer didn't come in words, but in a clear, firm, almost uncomfortable sensation. Backing away was no longer an option. Even if it hurt. Even if she failed. Even if the cost was high. The wedding day approached like a coming storm. Every final adjustment, every call from Laura, every sharp comment at work increased the pressure. Sarah felt she was stepping into something too big to control, yet too small to ignore. And that terrified her. It terrified her because, for the first time in years, she wasn't reacting just to survive. She was moving forward to take a position, even without knowing how it would all end. The night before the event, Sarah closed the last box and turned off the bedroom light. In the darkness, one certainty settled in, still surrounded by doubt. The path she had chosen offered no easy return. And from that point on, every step would take her deeper into the very center of what they had tried to turn into a trap. The explosion hadn't happened yet, but the ground was already beginning to shake. If this story has given you chills at any point, leave a like. It shows us you're feeling this turning point along with us. The car slowed down before coming to a complete stop, as if even the driver sensed this was not an ordinary moment. Sarah noticed the silence first. Not the silence of no sound, but the kind that comes right before something big happens, when the world seems to hold its breath for just a second longer than usual. Outside, the scene felt unreal. Golden lights scattered among old trees, stone pathways perfectly aligned, gardens designed with almost excessive precision, everything illuminated to be seen, photographed, remembered. Glasses raised, carefully measured laughter, voices overlapping in soft layers. Every detail seemed to exist to confirm status, belonging, power. Sarah took a deep breath before opening the door. When her foot touched the cold stone ground, she understood with calm clarity that there was no turning back from that step. There was no room left for rehearsal. No way to pretend this was just a formality. She walked forward. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Every step was deliberate, controlled, steady enough not to reveal the inner turbulence. The dark dress moved with her body as if it had been made for that exact moment. There was no excess, no attempt to draw attention. And yet, attention came all at once. Conversations unraveled mid-sentence. Laughter faded before it could finish. A waiter stood frozen for too long, unaware he was gripping the tray with unnecessary force. The atmosphere suffered a subtle, almost invisible rupture, as if something had shifted out of its expected place. Sarah moved through the open space, feeling eyes gather around her. They were not looks of contempt. They were confused, curious, unsettled. Something about her didn't fit the narrative everyone there believed they knew. She didn't look out of place. She didn't look lost. She didn't look like someone who had wandered in by mistake. She looked whole. At the center of the event, Rebecca Lawson posed for photos, smiling, confident, certain the night belonged to her. The light-colored dress reflected the glow, the bouquet perfectly positioned, every gesture rehearsed to project total control. When she sensed the shift in the room, she turned, still smiling. The smile didn't last. Her expression fractured for just a second, only one, but it was enough. Color drained from her face. The hand holding the bouquet tightened too hard, as if her body had reacted before her mind could catch up. Sarah kept walking. Rebecca tried to recover quickly. She straightened her shoulders, adjusted her smile, forced ease. She stepped closer, determined to reclaim control of a scene that was slipping through her fingers. She said something light, almost irrelevant compared to the weight of that moment. Sarah answered briefly. She didn't need to say more. Her presence spoke for itself. But the real impact hadn't come yet. An older man, discreet in posture, sharp-eyed, had been watching Sarah since the moment she appeared among the guests. Something in him shifted gradually. First his expression, then his breathing, and finally a hesitant step forward, like someone afraid to confirm a memory too old to be real. The name left his mouth quietly. Unsteady, but clear enough. And the world stopped. There was no music, no noticeable breeze, no immediate whispers. Just a heavy collective silence, as if everyone there had been pulled into the same suspended moment in time. Sarah felt the impact move through her entire body. Not like shock, like closure. A cycle that had dragged on for years finally made contact with reality. When she confirmed who she was, there was no long speech, no elaborate explanation. Just truth. Simple, bare. Spoken without the need for defense. The effect was immediate. Whispers began to spread, growing in small waves, colliding with one another. Some people stepped closer, as if needing to see with their own eyes. Others instinctively stepped back, creating space to reorganize everything they thought they knew. Her name moved from mouth to mouth, carrying old memories, forgotten stories, respect that had been buried but not destroyed. The foundation. The projects. Her parents. The real impact she had made long before that wedding was ever planned. Rebecca stepped back. The ground seemed unstable beneath her feet. The scene, so carefully designed to humiliate, was becoming impossible to control. The bride, once the absolute center of the event, was now merely a spectator to a revelation she had never anticipated. The groom, confused, was finally paying real attention. His eyes moved over Sarah as if trying to assemble pieces he never knew were missing. Sarah felt the weight of the past, and something new as well. A quiet kind of release. There was no anger, no desire for revenge. There was a boundary. When she spoke again, her voice wasn't seeking attention. It was seeking closure. She wasn't there to destroy anything. She was there because she had been invited, and because she had decided she would no longer exist only within the space others allowed her. The air felt lighter after that. Rebecca lost control. Composure gave way. The bouquet slipped from her hands and hit the pale ground, white flowers scattering in a way that felt almost too symbolic to ignore. Without looking back, she rushed away, pushing past people, fleeing the very plan that was now collapsing in public. Sarah stayed where she was for a few seconds. Not to absorb applause. Not to observe the chaos. Just to feel something break inside her. Not pain. Not fear. Something deeper. The certainty that this was the exact point where her story stopped being defined by false, and began being defined by choice. When she turned to leave, no one blocked her path. On the contrary, People stepped aside, not out of pity, not out of discomfort, but out of recognition. One by one, applause began to rise, tentative at first, then steady. It wasn't meant to humiliate anyone. It was meant to acknowledge something everyone there had understood too late. Sarah walked toward the exit without looking back. As she passed through the illuminated gates, she knew nothing there could be undone. The past would not return to silence. And from that moment on, any path she chose would be walked standing tall. The story had changed, and so had she. If this story resonated with you, consider supporting the channel with a super thanks or subscribing. It truly makes a difference for us. Outside the illuminated gates, the sound of the wedding felt distant, almost unreal, like music muffled by thick walls. Sarah walked a few steps before realizing her legs were trembling, not from fear, but from release, as her body began to process what her mind still couldn't fully organize. The night air was colder than she expected. She took a deep breath. The scent of flowers faded behind her, replaced by damp earth and asphalt still warm from the day. The golden light didn't reach that stretch of road. Out there, everything felt simpler, more real. She stopped. For a few seconds, she did nothing but stand there, staring into the distance, letting the silence settle inside her chest. There was no euphoria, no sense of victory. What remained was an open, unfamiliar space, like after an impact too strong, when the noise disappears but the body is still vibrating. The car waiting for her was just ahead. Laura leaned against the door, arms crossed, posture steady, watching without urgency. She didn't smile. She didn't ask questions. When Sarah approached, Laura simply opened the passenger door and waited. The gesture carried quiet respect. It was exactly what Sarah needed in that moment. Not explanations, not celebration, just space. Inside the car, the world seemed to shrink. Silence settled in without discomfort. The lights of the event fell away, reflected faintly in the glass like memories already beginning to lose definition. Sarah rested her forehead against the cold window, watching her reflection return a face she recognized, and yet didn't. It was no longer the face of the woman who moved through hallways unseen. But it wasn't yet the face of someone fully rebuilt. It was a face in transition. She felt like crying. She didn't. She felt like laughing. She didn't. There was a new emptiness, different from the old one. Before, it had been the absence of identity. Now, it was open space. And open space can be just as frightening as confinement. Laura broke the silence only when she noticed Sarah's breathing begin to slow. "You were whole," she said softly, careful not to intrude on the moment. The word echoed. Whole. It had been years since Sarah felt that way. She didn't answer right away. Some words need to pass through the body before they can find a voice. The car moved along the nearly empty road. Outside, the city continued as if nothing had happened. Streetlights passing, traffic signals changing, people living ordinary routines, unaware that something had broken open there, permanently. For Sarah, the world was no longer the same, even if it tried to look that way. When they arrived at the apartment, its simplicity no longer stung. The worn walls, the old couch, the familiar scent. Everything looked the same. But she didn't. Sarah slipped off her shoes slowly, as if relearning how to stand on that floor. She walked to the shelf and looked at the crooked photo frame. Her mother was still there, with the same steady gaze. For the first time, Sarah didn't feel guilt when she looked at that image. She felt continuity. She sat on the floor, her back against the wall. The dress was still on her body, but it no longer felt like armor. Now it was just fabric. She rested her hands on her lap, feeling her pulse speed up and slow down again, her body finding a more human rhythm. Images came and went without order. The silence of the garden. The suspended looks. Her name spoken aloud after being buried for so long. In that scattered flow of thoughts, Sarah realized something important. No one there had given her anything new. They had only returned what had always been hers. And that hurt. It hurt because it meant that everything she had lost before wasn't due to a lack of worth, but an excess of cruelty. She stood up, walked to the dark wooden box, and opened it once more. She took one of the old photographs, not with nostalgia, but with respect, and slipped it into her coat pocket, as someone who chooses to carry something not to cling to the past, but to remember where she came from. That night, Sarah made no grand decisions. She made no promises. She planned no sweeping futures. She simply accepted a tired, simple truth: rebuilding doesn't happen in the moment of victory. It happens the next day, and the next, and the next. Before going to sleep, she sat on the edge of the bed and took another deep breath. The silence of the room no longer felt empty. It felt like a necessary pause, a space where something new was beginning to take shape, still undefined. The world outside would keep pretending nothing had changed. Some people would return to smiling, others to forgetting, others to acting like they had always known. But Sarah knew, and for now, that was enough. She turned off the light without rushing. Not like someone running away, but like someone resting after crossing something too big to explain with words. A few weeks later, Sarah Mitchell's routine returned, but not in the same way. The building was the same. The long corridors, the cold marble beneath her feet, the familiar sounds echoing between tall walls. Still, something essential had shifted. Not the world, but the place she occupied within it. She kept waking up early, making her simple coffee, walking to the bus stop. She kept showing up, doing what needed to be done, dealing with whatever life placed in front of her. But now, every movement carried a different kind of presence. She no longer walked folded inward. Not because she had something to prove, but because she no longer needed to hide. Some people began greeting her by name. Others looked away, as if silence were a delayed apology. Sarah didn't demand anything. Not attention. Not recognition. She understood, perhaps better than anyone, that real change rarely makes noise. Many of the deepest shifts happen quietly, in places only the person living them can reach. At home, the photo frame remained crooked. The wooden box stayed tucked away, now opened more often. Not to relive the past, but to remember that it existed, that it was real, and that it was still part of her. Sarah didn't try to recover everything she had lost. Some things don't return, and accepting that is also a form of maturity. What truly changed was the way she looked at herself. The constant, silent, cruel question, "Do I belong?" was gone. The answer came effortlessly now. Belonging isn't about being accepted by a place. It's about no longer needing permission to exist. There were still open paths, decisions yet to be made, bridges that might be rebuilt, or not. Sarah wasn't in a hurry. New beginnings don't require speed. They require truth. And for the first time in many years, she had that. Maybe that's why this story speaks to you too. Because on some level, almost everyone has felt invisible, has swallowed words, has accepted less than they deserved just to keep going, has believed, for far too long, that they needed to fit into small spaces because it was that, or nothing. And maybe you're standing at that same point right now, wondering if it's worth showing up, worth saying who you are, worth facing the discomfort of being seen. The truth is, not every new beginning comes with applause. Some arrive quietly, through small choices, through a simple enough spoken only to yourself. And that alone can be enough to change an entire life. If you stayed until the end, it's because this story found you somewhere sensitive, maybe in an old exhaustion, maybe in a strength you hadn't noticed yet. Wherever that is, know this: you're not alone. Stories like yours are walking around every day, crossing corridors, waiting for nothing more than a moment of courage to breathe a little deeper. Thank you for being here. And I'll see you in the next video.